Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. Yeah. I'm Missy McNath, the Executive Director at the Calvert County Historical Society, and welcome to the beautiful North Beach Town Hall. And welcome to those of you who are joining us online, and a special shout out to Josh Daniels, tuning in from Filey, England, Calvert County's sister city. So we're very grateful to our partners at the Bayside History Museum under the leadership of Grace Mary Brady and the town of North Beach, whose support has made today's event possible. And thank you to our tech team today, Mike Hummel with the North Beach Town Council and Kevin Shomette, Director of Communications for North Beach. It is our gentlemen here and there, yes. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our Echoes of the Past Speaker program by Shore and Soil, Calvert County during the Revolutionary War. This presentation is part of our America 250th commemoration. This afternoon, we are extremely fortunate to be joined by two distinguished historians whose work has greatly expanded our understanding of the Chesapeake Bay region and its history. Ralph Eshelman is Historical and Cultural Resource Manager, vertebrate paleontologist, author, and lecturer. He is widely recognized as one of the foremost authorities on the maritime history and prehistory of the Chesapeake Bay region. Joining him is Donald Shomette, acclaimed historian, author, and underwater archaeologist. Renowned for his expertise on the Chesapeake Bay and early American naval history, he has written numerous award-winning books and is perhaps best known for discovering the remains of Commodore Joshua Barney's flotilla in the Patuxent River. Together, Ralph and Donald will explore the Calvert County's role during the Revolutionary War era, helping us better understand how local communities experienced and shaped the struggle for independence. But before we begin, a little housekeeping note. Please turn off or silence your cell phones. And now please join me in a warm welcome to Ralph Eshelman and Donald Shomette.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for showing up today, and a big thank you to all of our friends in Filey, our sister city, who are watching from afar. We have three things for you tonight. Number one, we're going to introduce to you something that is called a story map. And it's a story map about Maryland, and it includes Calvert County. And Calvert County really played a major role in producing this. This is something that was produced by Maryland 250. But what I want you to know is that the database for it came from a lot of work that I had done and then partially what Don had done. So we have made a contribution to the state of Maryland to give them a database on sites related to the Revolutionary War in Maryland. And then many of you may know a fellow by the name of Chris Sperling. Chris is the historic planner for Calvert County government, and Chris is also very much involved in working on story maps. And the state didn't have someone who was capable of doing that. I contacted Chris, and he finished the whole project. I wanted him to be here today, but unfortunately, he's in Crete. So I'm sure he's having a good time there, but he was not able to be with us today. But I wanted you to be introduced to it. So Kevin, if you would go ahead, and this is what it looks like if you go online. You can look at all of these different monitors. If you go online, all you have to do is just type in or say Maryland 250, and this will pop up. And then if you scroll down, you will see that it'll say story map. And when you go to the story map, scroll down again, which is Kevin is doing now, and eventually you'll come to a series of maps. And down at the very bottom is Calvert County, which is part of southern Maryland. So there's southern Maryland, and if you hit Calvert County, a map will pop up, and all of those different signs that you see there indicate historic sites in Calvert County related to the War of 1812. And just for kicks, we'll go ahead and look at Fishing Creek. We are essentially almost at Fishing Creek. For those of you who came from the south, you went across Fishing Creek to get here. And I don't know if you can read it or not, but if on the panel, there's the information about an engagement that took place at Fishing Creek during the Revolutionary War. So this is just a quick introduction. This is something you can play with. It's something that you can learn about the various sites all throughout Maryland, particularly southern Maryland, as well as Calvert County. So at this time, I'm going to ask Kevin to switch over to the PowerPoint. And no, I have a surprise for you. So this is the title of the presentation that Don and I are going to be giving you this evening.
Afternoon.
Kevin, it says, can you for some reason it's not forwarding. Oh, there we go. I wanted to show you this image. It has nothing to do with what we're doing tonight, but you might be able to recognize these two guys. And this is Don on the left and Ralph on the right, just as we're standing right now. This is when we were a little bit younger. But the reason I'm showing this to you is that we have been colleagues and friends for 49 and a half years. And come January, it's going to be our 50th anniversary. We're going to do something special. I have no idea what it might be. It might be going to a bar and having a drink. I don't know. But I just wanted to take an opportunity to let you know that Don and I have worked on many, many projects together. We've done publications together. We've individually given presentations when we've been at conferences together. This is the first time he and I have ever given a program together at the same time. So Don, it's a pleasure. So Don will be up in a few minutes.
We're going to the Safeway fruit counter.
All right. I hope this image in front of you, you may recognize. For some of you, it probably doesn't mean anything. But this is Brooklyn Heights. This is the battle between the Continental Army of the United States against the British. If you're familiar with Brooklyn, you know that Brooklyn Heights overlook the East River. On the right-hand side, you can just make out the East River, and that's where Manhattan was located. I'm starting out with this painting, which, by the way, was done much later than the actual battle, because it was at this battle that the Continental Army was severely threatened by the British. And scholars today say unanimously that if it wasn't for the Maryland line, probably the Revolutionary War would have been over. The Continental Army would have been defeated, and most of them would have been put in prison, and there would have been no army to fight for independence. So this is an important part of Maryland history, but it's also an important part of Calvert County history because we know of at least two individuals who were members of the Maryland line. And for those of you that are not familiar with the term Maryland line, each of the individual colonies had a line, and what that meant was an army. So there was the Pennsylvania line, there was the Delaware line, there was the Maryland line. The Maryland line consisted of about 400 members who were actually being paid to fight for independence. During this particular battle, the Maryland line was chosen by George Washington to defend the rear, while all of the men were hopping on barges and small boats to get across the East River to the safety of Manhattan. The reason he chose the Maryland line is because the Maryland line was the most experienced, they had the best training, and there was a lot of loyalty among those persons. There were 227 Marylanders who were part of this effort. And out of those 227, it's estimated that only about a dozen made it back home. What they had essentially done is they had sacrificed themselves to save the army. And they did it by very simply standing, giving volleys through their muskets, and then retiring maybe 100 feet, reload, and fire again. And they continued to do that to delay the British from taking over that army. So to me, this is one of the most important parts of the Revolutionary War that Maryland didn't take credit for, but also Calvert County, for two of the people that we know of who were part of that line. To me, this is very, very significant. Without them, we may not be part of what we call today the United States of America. So this is the Battle of Long Island. The painting was done in 1858. Are you familiar with the term Old Maryland? Are you familiar with what's called Maryland 400? Oftentimes that's the nickname of Maryland, and it's named after this particular battle right there. I wanted to also point out to you that it wasn't the British who were the first people that attempted to form a colony in what we call the east coast of the United States today. The Swedes came in much, much earlier, and they established two colonies. One of them was located on the Delaware River, and another one was located on the Hudson River. And what's interesting about the Swedish colony on the Delaware is that Maryland, which of course was not a state at that time, but the property of Maryland as we know it today was right on the border of that Swedish colony. And if you go up to the top on the Hudson River, what was the capital of that particular colony? It was called New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam is New York today. And what's interesting to me is that in both cases, the Swedes and the British decided to take the name from some place that was part of their country and put new in front of it. New Amsterdam, New York, signifying the original colonies that existed at that time. I also wanted to point out to you that there are revolutionaries that are recent in history. One of the most recent is Bangladesh, 1971. Another example is Kosovo in 1999. But how many of you know that there's actually two revolutions going on right now as we speak? And both of them are in Africa. One of them is Cameroon, and another one is in Ghana. So we are part of a revolution. Our country came out of a revolution for independence. And this has gone on with many, many countries throughout history. If you look at the colonies, you remember it's the 13 original colonies. Why do they say the original colonies? And why do they say 13? Because in fact, there were additional colonies that were owned by England that did not join the effort to become independent. That's why they say 13. So think about, well, look at this particular map. If you go up to the top, you can see Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia today is 3 different maritime provinces of what we call Canada. Canada did not exist at that time, but this was an English colony. They chose not to join the effort to be independent. And if you go down to the south, and if you look over on the west, you can see parts of Florida, and you'll notice it says Indian Territory. You'll also notice that we have Quebec territory. So we're talking about Spanish and French occupation, a part of what we call the United States today. If we went further to the west, there was Spanish occupations on the west coast. There were Russian occupations on what we call parts of the United States today. These were all colonies that weren't necessarily successful. What we seem to be proud about today are the 13 original colonies, because out of it came the country that we are now part of. I know what this is about. This is an opportunity for you to now vote. I want you to go back to 1776, 1777. Imagine that you lived there then. In your mind, do you think that you would have been a patriot which meant that you were for independence? Do you think you might have been a loyalist, which meant that you were going to be true to the mother country? Or did you not care one way or the other? And so I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. How many of you think you would have been patriots? I'm going to estimate 65%. How many of you think you would have been loyalists? I'm going to say 15%. How many of you would have been neutral? You're the smarter people. Well, that's true. But if you go back and you look at, now I'm talking about all of the colonies, I'm not just talking about Maryland. The best estimates that they've been able to come up with is that about 40 to 45% of the colonists would have supported the rebellion. So it wasn't even half the people. 40 to 45%. So 15 to 20% would have remained loyal to the crown. And the rest were neutral. They didn't want to side one way or the other. I think that's very interesting. It was less than 50% of the people at that time who really wanted to declare independence. We have a question. Yes, ma'am, or sir. Yes. Absolutely. I'm not sure if everyone could hear that, but you also bring up another important point that I should have mentioned. When did the Revolutionary start and when did it end? 1776 to 1783. That's a long time. And as the war went on, people changed their opinions on things. So this is an analysis that was done based on the best records that they had of the average citizen at that time. But as the war went on, when things weren't good, the number of people who were against it went higher. When things went well, the number of people went down. So it's really, to me, very interesting. Yes, ma'am.
Is this reflecting women's opinions? Did they even get asked?
Good point. I wanted to point out to you that of the loyalists, they estimate there were around 25,000 who actually fought with the British. So that meant that you could have had neighbors who were loyalists that went off and joined the British Army and assisted the British Army. That's a lot of people. And then the other thing I wanted to point out to you is that the Continental Congress, over time, beginning in 1777 to 1780, tried to pass laws where if you were a loyalist, you could take their land and sell it. You could confiscate their land and you could sell it. And that happened in Calvert County. Calverton Manor, which was over 3,592 acres, was taken by the Maryland government and sold to 14 different individuals because they were loyalists. This was the punishment that was being given to people who remained loyal to the crown. It was a different time and place than what a lot of us really tend to think about. I'm going back again to the Maryland line because I just wanted to point out to you that the United States issued a stamp to commemorate that. And off to the right is a monument that still stands in Brooklyn Park. I don't know how many of you may have ever been there. It's actually a beautiful park. I know Don's been there, I've been there. But this is a monument to the Marylanders who fought at the Battle of Brooklyn. So think about that. In Brooklyn, New York, there's a monument to Marylanders. I think that's very important. Some of you may recognize this particular painting. The guy in the middle is George Washington. This is when he resigned the command of the Continental Army, when the war was over. I'm showing it to you because where did that take place? It took place in Annapolis at the State House that still stands there today. I'm not going to read all this kind of stuff to you, but Thomas Johnson should be a name that everybody here knows. I think most of you live in Calvert County. He was the first elected governor of Maryland. That meant that all of the governors before him were appointed by the crown. They were considered royal governors. This is the first governor that was voted on to be the governor of what today is the state of Maryland. And where was he from? Calvert County. Where did he live? On St. Leonard's Creek. So another amazing thing that we should be proud of. And that painting, by the way, hangs in the old Senate chamber of the Maryland State House today. You can go and you can actually see that. And another thing I'll point out to you is that when George Washington left Mount Vernon to get to Annapolis, he crossed the Patuxent River to get there. It wasn't in Calvert County, but it was just north of Calvert County. This is a portrait of the first governor of Maryland, Thomas Johnson. And you may be a little shocked that I'm showing you a pair of false teeth. I think all of you have heard about the famous set of false teeth that George Washington has. But how many of you knew that we have a pair of false teeth from our first governor? They're not in Calvert County. Why? I don't know. But they're in Howard County. And if you go to their museum at Ellicott City, you can see them on display. I think our historical society needs to get those on loan to come back here to Maryland so that we can see this guy's false teeth. Anyway, that's just my opinion. I hope all of you know that when you go over this bridge, that it's named after the first governor of Maryland from Calvert County. So how appropriate is that? And the official name is the Governor Thomas Johnson Memorial Bridge. It's a mouthful. Most people call it the Solomon's Bridge, but that's its official title, the first governor of Maryland. Many of you probably heard of the Peggy Stewart. This is supposedly an event where tea had been imported, came into Annapolis. They paid the custom on the tea, the tax on the tea, which was forbidden by the government because it was against, we were trying to fight against the government, the British government. And so because of that, this vessel was confiscated. Don's going to talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to point out to you that before this vessel came back to the Chesapeake Bay, it was in the Patuxent River picking up tobacco to take to England. So there's another connection right there. I think you guys are all familiar with the French army that came in and essentially saved the United States because of the battle at Yorktown. Without the French, I don't think the Continental Army was going to win the war. But what many of you don't know is that when that army came from Rhode Island down toward what we call Virginia, there were several different paths that were taken. Some people went by vessel. If you were in the militia or if you were in the infantry, you would take a different path than would the wagons that were carrying supplies. And the artillery, which was heavy, could not go over all the different bridges. So all of these different pieces of the army had to go in different directions. But if you look at this map up there and you look at the orange, you can see that that group of folks came right down to Upper Marlboro. And as was the custom at this time, all of the towns along the paths of where these troops were heading would get together and provide food and provisions for the army as it was moving south. And we have documentation that people in Calvert County provided food for the army when they came to Upper Marlboro. So that army never came into Calvert County, but people here supported that army. There were also incidents that something maybe we don't want to particularly be proud of. This is an example of a deserter from the local militia This is 1777. His name is William Evans. His nickname is Indian Doctor. If anybody can tell me how he got that name, I would very much like to know that. To me, that's a very interesting name for this individual. But he is someone who deserted his position. So that's not anything to be particularly proud of, but at the time, there were large numbers of people who were deserting the Army. On this particular slide, you're looking at David Hunter. He's from Calvert County, and he served as a pilot for the British naval vessels operating on the Chesapeake Bay. This is another example of a loyalist. This is why I had that vote to see who of you might be a loyalist, who of you might not. This is a loyalist, and he served as a pilot to help guide British ships on the Patuxent and the Chesapeake Bay. And then citizens at the mouth of the Patuxent River requested that Governor Sims try to protect the river, because particularly by about 1780 and 1781, we were beginning to have depredations take place in the Patuxent River area. And Don's going to talk more about that as well. So what they did is they asked the Patuxent Associates. This is a group of people who got together to try to counsel and figure out what can we do to protect ourselves from the British, because the local militia, for the most part, were more active with the Continental Army. That's not to say that there weren't militia locally, but they were not able to be everywhere at the same place. And this is a letter. I know you can't read it, but I'm just going to show it to you. This is 1781. And in it, it talks about row galleys to be stationed at the mouth of the river. That's the mouth of the Patuxent River. Here's another part of the letter. A barge of 40 feet keel to row with 16 oars. Another part of the letter. A whale boat to serve as a lookout. And then the last part. A 3-pound cannon on each side of the river, no less than 25 militia for each cannon. I said last, I think there's one more, yeah. And beacons to be fixed at proper places for alarm. So imagine if you were living in Calvert County in 1781. This is the kind of thing that was going on because of the threats from British and Loyalists against the people that lived in this community. So when we talked about the vote, whether you would be a loyalist or whether you would be a patriot or whatever, you can imagine how that would change depending on the consequences of how that war was going and how it affected different people in different places in the state. This is another letter. This is April 28, 1781, and it talks about constructing a fort at Drum Point. I hope all of you know Drum Point is at the mouth of the Patuxent River in Calvert County. And it also says that that fort was to be not less than 10 9-pounders, meaning 10 different cannons that could fire 9-pound cannonballs. That's pretty amazing. Did that fort ever get built? Did the money ever become available for the forts here? Did these vessels ever get built that they were asking for? No, not to our knowledge. So who served during the Revolutionary War from Calvert County? Peregrine Fitzhugh was aide-de-camp to George Washington. I think that's pretty significant. And I bet you very few people here even knew that. There's a Calvert Countyan who served as the aide-de-camp to George Washington. That's big stuff. That's something to be proud of. William Coe, he fought at the Battle of Long Island. He served in the Maryland line. We don't know absolutely, but we believe he was present during the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. So he's one of the few that actually made it back. How about the Wilkinson brothers? I'm running out of time, but if you're familiar with the Wilkinsons, it's an amazing family, and they've done all kinds of things that are military related. Joseph Wilkinson was commander of the Calvert County Militia. James Wilkinson. He joined the Continental Army at age 19 and became a captain. Think about when you were 19. Would you even be thinking about doing something like that, let alone end up being a captain? He was a brevet brigadier general in the Continental Army. Brevet means that he was given that command on the field. He fought in the Battle of Princeton. This is a Calvert Countyan, and we don't really hear about the Wilkinsons. And he helped to negotiate the surrender of the British at the Battle of Saratoga. This is big stuff. We have something here to be proud of. And then he resigned. In this part, I don't think we can be particularly proud of. He was a clothier general of the Continental Army, but then he got fired by George Washington. I'm not sure what happened. So there is a black mark next to this guy. But anyway, James also wrote a very interesting account at the Battle of Princeton. And I think many of you have probably read it but never realized that it came from someone from Calvert County. And this is his description of the men at the Battle of Princeton. And I'm going to read it to you in case you can't see it. Many of the poor soldiers, quite barefoot and ill-clad, their route was easily traced as there was little snow on the ground, which was tinged here and there with blood from the feet of the men who wore broken shoes. Those were the conditions of the Continental Army at the Battle of Princeton, which took place during the winter. And that account was written by a Calvert Countyan, and you see it in books all over that talk about the Revolutionary War, but nobody really connects the two together. It's a Calvert Countyan that wrote that account. Again, something to be proud of. George Platter, he's not Calvert County. He's St. Mary's County. He's just across the river at Sauterley. But what did he do? He asked all of the people that had wealth in southern Maryland to give up some of your gold and your silver to help support the Revolutionary War. And we know that Rousby's, down at the mouth of the Patuxent River, contributed to that. We don't know exactly what they gave, but many of these families had lots of silver. It wasn't a big deal to maybe give a pitcher or whatever of silver that could then be used to help support the Continental Army. That's another way that people could help. Kinsey Johns of Prince Frederick, he was authorized to go out and purchase pork to support the Continental Army. And he was complaining that there was a Bermudian who was offering more money for the pork than what he was authorized to pay for. And so he was complaining. And so the question is, when you're in that situation, if you're a patriot, are you going to sell your pork to the lower buyer, meaning the American government, or are you going to sell that pork to the Bermudian for a higher value? If you're a patriot, you know what you're going to do. If you're a loyalist, you know what you're going to do. These are the kinds of things that affected people at that time. I'm going to end now with something that very few people know about, and this is something that came from the research of your Calvert County Historical Society. I had not known about this, but at the end of the war, Peter Helen, who was the surveyor of Calvert County, he decided to rename 2 islands in Calvert County, Independence and Liberty, in commemoration and celebration of the United States of America becoming a country, of succeeding in the Revolutionary War. Those islands, although they were named by him, Liberty and Independence, they've not retained their names today, but they did make that attempt when the war was over. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Don, who's going to finish it up and talking about specific sites in the Patuxent River, Calvert County, and Chesapeake Bay related to the War of 1812. Thank you.
Hard to follow. Let's see if I can figure this out. We want to go back one. In order to address what happened specifically here in the county, we got to get an idea of where we stand in the universe. Calvert County is, of course, in the Chesapeake Bay, which is the, let's see, if I press this forward here, is that it? Which one is it? Oh, here we go. Is this it? Yeah, okay, I got the wrong one. If we look at the Chesapeake Bay, you can see where Calvert County is actually almost halfway down the bay. And the bay is the largest estuarine system in North America. If you look at the statistics, you know, it's 200 miles long from the entrance up to the head of Elk, but it incorporates a drainage which is as large as the British Isles. It is, 42 rivers running into it, 100,000 minor tributaries running into those. So it is really something. It is also the most fought over body of water in the Western Hemisphere. More battles, more fights, more conflict on those waters, more smuggling, more everything, because it is unique. Well, Calvert County stands in the middle of this. Now, Calvert County is, like I said, about 50% of the way up and the way down. And we're on a peninsula, which makes it rather interesting. On one side, of course, is the Patuxent River, and on the other side is the bay itself. Now, that makes it extremely vulnerable, too. Now, in the colonial days, there was no roads, really, to speak of. Everything was transported by water. If you weren't on the water, you didn't exist. You don't count. If you're a farmer, everything goes by a rolling road down to the waterfront. Very few towns. The towns that were created were very minor towns. We had about 130 of them created by edict, but most of them didn't really take off. Calvert County, we only had a few. Everything was based on tobacco here in southern Maryland, here in Calvert County. That was gold. That was gold. Calvert County tobacco was called Calvert Gold. Well, the county was not very heavily populated. We only had 8,000 people. About 45% of them were black slaves or a few freemen. All of southern Maryland only had, 58,000 some people. So this was a lightly populated area. St. Mary's County is on a peninsula also. All peninsulas are vulnerable from three sides. Well, to put it in perspective of how the county got into the war, we've got to go back to where everybody got into the war when we first started protesting about the Stamp Act, when the Parliament is trying to bring back money from the cost of the previous war with the French and Indian War. Now, the protests, of course, went on and on and on up to the Intolerable Acts and so forth. And most of the states, or the county, or the colonies, were in one form of protest or another. Maryland was not to be exempted. Massachusetts was one of the leaders, and of course, when the last acts were passed and the Parliament attempts to maintain a symbolic control by only taxing tea, Boston revolted, and of course we had the Boston Tea Party, and that resulted in the closure of Boston itself. That was the lightning rod. Now, coming back here to the Chesapeake, we had those same protests going on around here. There were Boston Tea Parties in a number of states, and Maryland was one of them. One of the very first, of course, was, as Ralph was talking about, in essence, the Peggy Stewart. Anthony Stewart, who lived in Annapolis, but his father-in-law lived in London town, was a partner with him in the Peggy Stewart, was importing, exporting, and they brought in symbolic targeted material, and he was forced to destroy his own ship. That ship today lies under the Naval Academy in Annapolis. There's a marker up there, and that marker is actually just east of Luce Hall, which is maybe one of the sites. When they were digging there some years ago, when they were building the hall, they found charred remnants of a ship. Well, they later on found charred remnants of ships elsewhere too. So whether it was the Peggy Stewart, still up in the air, but symbolically, we get into this. We don't have just one ship burning. We have a bunch of them. And one of them is right here at the head of Herring Bay. In 1775, 74, there was 3 islands out there. They call them 3 Sister Islands. And that's right at the head, at the northern edge of Herring Bay. Arguably, the shoal might have been within Calvert County's territory. But another ship called the Toteness came in, and 1776, 75, on July 9, and her owners, a fellow named Gildart, and his son, who was the factor in Baltimore, managing the sales of the cargo, were responsible for this. They had sent another ship in, which was actually turned back, the Johnson. The Toteness came in, and she ran aground. Now, whether or not she ran aground intentionally by the captain's will or not, but he made no effort to get her off. Well, pretty soon this word got out, and this gets to be a big deal in Baltimore, and where the Committee of Safety, or the correspondence, is, well, what do we do? What do we do? And the idea was, well, okay, let's go burn her. Well, the idea was they were going to get Gildart, the son, to come down and do like they did with the Peggy Stewart and burn it. But unfortunately for them, they were beat out by guys from the West River. The West River guys came out and said, let's just do the whole thing right now. And they burned the Toteness. And the islands are no longer there. They disappeared at the end of the 19th century. There's a flats out there now, and no archaeology has been done to look for it. But it is our own little Boston Tea Party. There was another one that was burned over in the Chester River. Now, Calvert County was like every other county in the state. We had a number of loyalists. We had a number of patriots, and the majority just wanted to stay the hell out of it. Most of the farmers did not want to go one way or the other. If you were the Sons of Liberty or other radical groups, they would be called terrorists today. Other radical groups would take you out and do you in, make you be punished with tarring and feathering. And if you pour tar over somebody, hot tar, you know that's pretty bad. And then to put feathers on top of it, and then to be run out. Anthony Stewart was forced to leave 2 years later and never came back. He went up to Canada and became a very wealthy merchant in Canada. Well, the lightning rod, of course, came at the Battle of Lexington and Concord in April 1775. This is the lightning rod that begins the American Revolution. And here in the Chesapeake Bay, this enormous body of water, it's going to be pivotal in many, many ways in the war. Now, we didn't have many, we had a lot of minor guerrilla stuff, but we didn't have major battles in Maryland, fortunately. Now, at the time that this is happening, our governor, Robert Eden, who is extremely popular, he goes to the racetrack at Nottingham. He goes to the cricket matches at Queen Anne's Town on the Patuxent. He's popular among the people. He's popular among the politicians. He has, one of his council members is Fitzhugh, Colonel Fitzhugh from Rousby Hall, who was a revolutionary, a loyal follower of the king. And they want to get rid of him. John Hancock says, let's arrest him, get rid of him. They send a party out to arrest him. At the time, he is down at Resby Hall with Fitzhugh, and they don't find him. He comes back to Annapolis, and wiser heads said, well, wait a minute, this guy's a good guy. Let's see if we can negotiate this. And ultimately, Governor Eden is sent away on HMS Fowey in Annapolis Harbor, and it's a peaceful departure. Years later, he comes back. All of his property is confiscated. And years later, he comes back, and he is honorably buried in the cemetery around St. Anne's and Annapolis. Now, Loyalists in southern Maryland, like elsewhere, in Calvert County are being suppressed. And suppression can be anything from just being antagonized or beaten up or having your property taken away. In 1777, of course, we moved forward to do that across the board. So when Eden is gone, when Eden departs, we have a guy that Ralph was talking about, Thomas Johnson. An incredible man, absolutely incredible. If you read his biography, it's absolutely incredible. He's not only he's in the First and Second Continental Congress, and he becomes our first elected governor from St. Leonard Creek. Then he becomes a Supreme Court justice. And one of the most pivotal things that he does is to nominate George Washington to become Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. This is incredible, because there were contenders for that position, and there would be contenders for it later on in cabals. But Washington, without Washington, of course, we would not be a nation. Now, governors, royal governors around the colonies are being expelled right and left. Now, one of those governors happens to be this fellow, John Murray, the last royal governor of Virginia, who is basically forced out. The Virginians want him out, and they force him out, and he's got a few troops, but not a lot. And he decides that the only way he can hold off being pushed out is to free black slaves and bring black slaves into the British Army. And he creates the Ethiopian Corps. And these soldiers work with him throughout. They defend the crown. They are staying with him. And pretty soon, all the loyalists in the Hampton Roads area are joining forces, but they can't do much. They get defeated in the one battle at Battle of Great Bridge. And Dunmore and all of the loyalists are forced to go aboard a fleet of ships. There's between 40 and 100 vessels, large and small, including a number of Royal Navy warships. And they are a population afloat. The first printed newspaper is Dunmore's Gazette, which is printed aboard a warship in Hampton Roads. But it's an untenable situation. He tries to take it back. He bombards Norfolk. He burns part of Norfolk down. And then he moves to Maryland. He needs water. There's no water for several hundred, maybe thousands of people on board. Now in Calvert County, we had two military units. We had the 1st Maryland Independent Company, which is actually Calvert and St. Mary's, commanded by Resident Bell, not Beale, but Bell. And we have the Flying Camp, which is commanded by John Brooke. Now the Flying Camp, that's a special body that's supposed to be very mobile, very fast. And the Flying Camp is called upon very quickly to respond to Dunmore's attack. Dunmore is coming into St. George's Island. He needs to get water. They land on the island July 15, 1776. And when they land on the island, they're going to try to establish a permanent base. The St. Mary's County militia, independents, and the flying camp respond quickly. The flying camp rushes over, and they have a battle. The Battle of St. George's Island is probably one of the largest, isn't it, Ralph? Largest battle in Maryland. And they drive Dunmore away. And pretty soon after that, the flying camp and Bell's company are sent north to join George Washington. And they will be at the Battle of Brooklyn. They will be in the Maryland line. Most of them will be killed. Now, at the time of the Battle of St. George's Island, Maryland had its own navy. We are going to have a navy. 10 other colonies are also going to have their navy. We're going to have the Continental Navy, we're going to have state navies, and we're going to have privateers. So all of these are going to be naval forces. Well, our first boat out is a ship called the Defense, and she learns of Dunmore, and she is coming down, and she arrives just a little bit too late. Well, the Maryland Navy is going to be less than effective throughout the whole war. That's being nice. And of course, at the battle, the flying camp stands its ground. Now, throughout Maryland, the Tories are starting to make their weight known too, as people are choosing up sides. On the Eastern Shore, which becomes a very large hotbed of Tory activity, there are insurrections, some of which are put down and some are not. Guerrilla operations are generally out of the Eastern Shore, Somerset County, Wycomico, a little bit out of Dorchester. And for the Loyalists, it's difficult. And for those who are in between, it's even more difficult because both sides don't like you. Now, we had a Quaker community in Calvert County, and the Quakers, the Friends, their central convention, which was in Philadelphia, decided that there would be no choosing sides. We're not going to fight for one side, we're not going to fight for the other, we're not going to take up arms, and we are against slavery. That didn't go over too well in Calvert County. Calvert County, with what, 40%, 45% of the population being slaves, this was a difficult choice. So pretty soon, from their two churches, the head of St. Leonard's Creek and on the Scientist Cliffs, the Quakers are expelled. Now, the Bay is a transit zone for a lot of activity. The Royal Navy they own the Bay most of the war. And in 1777, there is a move to capture the capital of the Revolution in Philadelphia, and they're going to do it in a unique way. They're not going straight from New York, which the British have as their center of command. They're going to come up the Bay. They're going to go all the way around and come up the Bay. The Howe brothers, Admiral and General. And when they come up, the sweep up the Bay initiates a lot of Loyalist activities. And Loyalist operations begin to run up and down the Bay. There are people in the county here who are trying to do something about that. Some people from Lower Marlborough, the Gants of Lower Marlborough, for instance, have mosquito boats or small boats that go out and harass the enemy when they can. But it's not long before the Loyalists start to come in. Towards 1780, Loyalist forces gathering on the Eastern Shore begin operations that frequently generate attacks on Calvert County, St. Mary's County, and on the Patuxent Basin and along the shoreline all the way up. This happens to be the second Rousby Hall. Colonel William Fitzhugh, who was an old man, but a very organized man. He was one of the people who was close to Governor Eden, but becomes even closer to Governor Johnson. And he organizes the defense, what there is of the county. Most of the county young men are either fighting up in the north with Washington or are fighting or joining the Loyalists or have been kicked out. This is Resby Hall, which is at the entrance of the river, was attacked, and they asked for, the Loyalist group asked for money, and they asked for produce, and Fitzhugh said no, no. So they bombard the place and destroy it, set it afire. And so the Resby plantation is destroyed. It's later rebuilt, of course. Resby decides he had better retreat to the Perrin plantation, which is on Point Patience. Now, the Perrin plantation proved not to be a good place to retreat to because that happens to be the next stop of the Loyalist guerrillas. Well, as Ralph mentioned, we are trying to, in Calvert County, St. Mary's County, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel, we're trying to figure out, and Charles County, we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we stop these guerrilla raids on the Patuxent? We have a state navy. The state of Maryland is absolutely broke. Governor Sims now says, I can't do anything. You know, we can send a couple of guys down, but we can't do anything. Well, about this time, Maryland, we are doing a lot on the water. Maryland is the third largest producer of privateers in the Revolution. We got Massachusetts, we got Pennsylvania, and we got Maryland. And privateering coming out of Baltimore and Annapolis is pretty heavy. And because the state navy isn't very good, can't do much as escorts or anything, privateers are hired to protect trade. And 3 privateers, the Cato, the Nautilus, and the Hawk, are hired by the state of Maryland to carry produce. They're going down to the West Indies they got to get some trade going. We need some money. And off of Cedar Point, off the mouth of the Patuxent, actually off of Drum Point, and then it migrates down, they encounter HMS Isis. Now, Isis is a big ship. Oop, going ahead here. Isis is a big ship. And the privateers, which are smaller, one of them is run aground. One of them is run aground out in the right off of Cedar Point, which is where the Patuxent Naval Air Station is now. And the third one is run aground, but not too bad. The one that's out in the water is captured and blown up. The one ashore breaks up, and the Nautilus, it's salvageable. Well, this is seized upon because this guy, one of our traders here, Benedict Arnold, probably the best commander of any officer in the American Revolution on both sides. I would say he was directly responsible for our victory at Saratoga. And he becomes a traitor afterwards. And he's wounded at Saratoga, but because he is a traitor, there is a monument to him at Saratoga, but not his name. It's a monument which is a carved boot, because he was shot in the leg. And that's the only thing that commemorates Benedict Arnold. Well, he joins the British, he's a general, and they send him to Virginia. They send Lafayette to go get him. The Americans do. General Lafayette, I guess he's about 21 now, 22. And with Arnold coming down, again we get a sweep of guerrilla increasing activity. The Loyalists are again taking note and moving. What's happening here? There we go. The Loyalists come back to the Patuxent River. There's a number of them. The most prominent of them is a fellow named Joseph Whalen Jr. and another one named Jonathan Robinson. And these fellows from the Eastern Shore used Deal Island, Janes Island, and a couple of the islands, sometimes Tangiers, as bases of operations. And they are incredible. They just roam all over, and there's not much to stop them. They come into the Patuxent, 1781. Robinson comes in, Robinson comes in, and his crew are all freed black slaves. Now the Americans are starting to call them picaroons. The word is originated, picari, I think it is, in Italy, which means brigand. And they are working in the cause of the crown, although none of them ever have a commission. They go up to Lower Marlborough. They sack the town. They capture ships in the harbor. They capture a number of people. That take one of the commanders of the Maryland State Navy, who lived in Upper Marlborough, and he commanded a ship called the Conqueror. And Lower Marlborough is sacked. They take a number of hostages, including Gant and others, who are very important in organizing minor resistance against them. Oh, I got that out of order here, but you can see where the Cato and the Hawk ran aground. Well, the privateering activity is getting pretty heavy on the bay, on both British and American. By this time, England forbid the use of privateers because it took away from their manpower. The Royal Navy was always in need of manpower. They had to go out and press people into service. Well, we had a battle off of the mouth of the Patuxent River between an American privateer and two British privateers. The Jack-o'-lantern was the American, and the Felicity and the Antelope were the British. Well, on board one of the ships was found the baggage of the baggage of Lafayette. Lafayette's baggage had been captured at the head of Elk, and it was returned to him with some display. Well, we come to what looks to most people like the end of the Revolution. They move against Yorktown, great move by the Americans and the French. Without the French, we would not have won the Battle of Yorktown. The French Navy comes down, blockades. The Chesapeake keeps the British out from resupplying the General Cornwallis's fleet, soldiers at Yorktown, and the battle results in American victory after the seizure of a fort called Redoubt Number 10. And the surrender, of course, for most people is the end of the American Revolution. But the war isn't over for 2 more years. And the Maryland State Navy has one of the last naval battles on the bay at a place called Kedge's Straits, just north of Smith Island. And we get whooped really bad. The flagship blows up, and we take a lot of casualties and so forth. But the war goes on. The Loyalist raids continue, and specifically, in every one of those circular dots, is places that Loyalists attacked and sacked. 1780 through 1782. They are raiding all over the bay, but we really got hit first and most. The town of Benedict is one of the last to really be nailed, and that was by Joseph Whalen, who comes in with 3 ships, 3 boats, and probably about 100 men, and he sacks the town February 1782. Hauls off stuff. He burns things, takes off the produce and stuff. He just sacks the town. The Board of Patuxent Associators had already gotten together, and in June 1782, they decide we got to do something. And as Ralph pointed out, they organized to put cannons out, to field troops, to buy boats, and so forth. They ultimately do buy a ship. They go to Baltimore, and they were going to buy one of the prizes that the jack-o'-lantern had captured, but instead, they buy one of the ships that the ISIS had driven ashore and had been salvaged and brought back to Baltimore. They bring on board they buy the Nautilus, and they bring her down to Nottingham, which becomes the base of operations. Nottingham became the base where the merchants of all of the counties of the Patuxent River, the merchants along the county, formed the Board of Patuxent Associators specifically for this. They probably mounted guns at Hollowing Point, Hollowing Cliffs, and maybe built the fort, we don't know. But after this, the depredations kind of ended. We go into the peace treaty talks, and the talks go on and on and on. And finally, we get the signing in the Treaty of Paris, September 3rd, 1783. And the United States becomes a nation. We become one of the greatest nations on the planet, and hopefully we will still maintain that position. Thank you. Anybody got any questions for him? Yeah.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. What happened to Wayland after the war?
Wayland actually comes back in the War of 1812. He is, at the beginning of the war, he is arrested for his Tory sympathies. And then he escapes and, or buys his way out, and he becomes the bad guy for us, for the Patriots. And after the war, he kind of disappears into the eastern shore milieu. There were a number of loyalists who later on reappear in the War of 1812, and some people who were in between, and they are, oh, we're going to get it back, it's coming back. We had one loyalist from Calvert County, a fellow named Carcaud, who was kicked out from Lower Marlboro, or the area around Lower Marlboro, and he had a large estate, and his wife stayed behind. He went to England and stayed there, and the state government authorized, I think it was 1778, passed an ordinance that people who were residing outside and not supporting us were considered traitors, and he was one. Well, his wife is always pushing with the state legislature, with the legislature, you know, we can keep our house, we got to keep our property. And she's successful. And he comes back in 1786, I think it is, and he buys some more property up at Hall Creek, up at the head of the county. And he buys property up at Hall Creek, and he becomes a successful guy. His son is elected to the state legislature. So not everything goes bad, but for most of the loyalists, they ended up in Halifax or some places in the West Indies. Yes?
So I understand you correctly to say that the Quakers were expelled?
They weren't expelled, they were rather forced out because
Where did they go?
they went up into Anne Arundel and they were forced out of there too. The Quakers are not very popular because they didn't want to do either way.
Hey, Don, we'll use this mic out here for Q&A.
Yeah, by the time of the Revolution, what had become of the Calvert family, and did any of them ever live in Calvert County, and were they on one side or the other during the Revolution?
Not to my knowledge, they didn't live in the county. Kipling Hall, incidentally, is in Yorkshire, England, which was the home of George Calvert, the first Lord Baltimore, the founder of Maryland. And that's in Yorkshire, which is part of our. I think one of the descendants who lived in Prince George's had a place down on the river down near Queen Anne's, but I don't know of any that live down here.
Were they still a viable family at the time of the Revolution, and were they on one side or the other?
Yeah, they were still around, but I don't know I couldn't answer that. I'm ignorant. Yes.
1 second.
What?
Whatever happened to Benedict Arnold after the Virginia battle?
Arnold went home to England, not home, but he went to England, and he tried to establish himself as a merchant, and he didn't do too well, and he went to Halifax in Canada. The British didn't trust him. That's why they sent him down to Virginia. Get the heck out of here. Because, you know, if you're a trader, you could be a two-way trader. And although he was a great general, he destroyed the Virginia State Navy. He captured Richmond. He did a whole lot of things and never got any support. The British supported the wrong people, actually. And he goes up to Halifax, and he becomes a merchant up there, and ultimately.
Any other questions?
Do we know?
Yeah, right up the road and the entrance. We actually excavated while you were living there, while you were living across the way. It's about farm. We there. Not Soller's on the other side. Yeah. Make. But the park is direct. Artillery positions there and so forth. Ralph's son actually built, when he was a Boy Scout, built a. I heard there was a battle there. Yeah. It's never been excavated.
Were any slaves in the Revolutionary War?
Were there slaves? Yes. There were slaves on both sides. The British ended up with a lot more African Americans than the American side. It's estimated that about 5,000 the Americans, that number served. Any other questions? Any answers?
Thank you so much to Ralph Eshelman and Don Shomette for sharing the fascinating insights. County's rich history. North Beach Town Hall for hosting us, Bayside History Museum for partnering with us, and all of you in the audience and for anyone watching online. 70 Church Street in Prince Frederick to explore our archives and try your hand at family research. And don't miss our next free event at Linden, a Stars and Stripes Forever concert with the Calvert Dance Band on Thursday, July 16th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. I have membership forms and flyers in the back, and I'm happy to talk to you back there. So thank you all for joining us.